So I go to a wedding of a friend of mine, and this friend he's kind of an engineer. He designs furniture for a living, but he watches a lot of science television. In the United States, we've got the Discovery Channel, and he watches PBS, public broadcasting shows on television, and he considers himself a bit of an armchair scientist, and he's always giving me a bad time. Hazen, you're a religion guy, and I'm a science guy. So over our friendship, over the years, he's always repeating this little mantra, and he's getting married. So he invites me and a few friends to his wedding, and we go, and I remember it was at the reception, and they were serving champagne, and he and his new bride had had a few glasses, and they were wandering around greeting their guests. They finally walked out to the table where I was, sitting with some friends, and he walks up to the table and goes, "Hey, Hazen, thanks for coming to my wedding. I'm so glad you're here. We've had some great talks over the years. But I think it all boils down to this, You're a religion guy, and me, I'm a science guy." So I probably shouldn't have said this at his wedding. It just came out, I said, okay, so is it wrong to torture babies for fun? Strange question to ask at a guy's wedding, right? Well, he's thinking about it because he knows we've had enough conversations where I've got a trick embedded in this somewhere, and he's thinking about the trick. Well, he delayed. It didn't even take a nanosecond of delay before his new bride is looking at him with great worry. She's got a hold of his arm, and she's looking up at him and at me and him, and is it? Well, tell the man it's wrong. Of course it's wrong. He knows it's wrong, right, dear? And he's still thinking about it. She's hitting him in the shoulder. It was a disaster. But he met with me months later and said, "You really had me in a pickle there, because I was thinking, look, if he's asking that, if I say yes, it's wrong to torture babies for fun, I'm admitting that there's something I can know about the universe that didn't derive from science." He actually got the point. I think it took the bride punching him in the arm to get through. So yeah, if I say no, it's not wrong, I'm in trouble with my wife. If I say yes, I'm admitting something, some bit of knowledge of the universe that did not derive from science. What are these lines of demarcation? Where does science stop and other forms of knowledge pick up?
Well, now I think, as Jeff said, it's very hard to draw lines of demarcation that are not blurry. In cosmology, for example, as you know, Alex Vilenkin has referred to what he does in cosmology as metaphysical cosmology. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what a remarkable label, metaphysical cosmology, because it's on the very limits of science. And in fact, one other area that I wanted to bring out to piggyback on what Jeff said is the other end of the universe, eschatology, the way the world will end. Eschatology is traditionally a field of theology, right? What will be the last things? Physical eschatology is now a domain of cosmology. Cosmogony is the beginning of the universe. Eschatology, and they use that word, it's the study of how the universe will end. So this would be another example of where questions that were once thought to be metaphysical have now become scientific and are open to investigation. So the lines are blurry. But to answer your question more directly, logical and mathematical truths are not scientifically provable. They're presupposed by, not provable by, science. Ethical truths that you mentioned, aesthetic truths, the beautiful, like the good, is not accessible to the scientific method. Metaphysical truths, like the reality of the external world, the reality of the past, the presence of other minds. These are metaphysical truths that cannot be proven or disproven scientifically. And ironically, science itself. Science is permeated, I think Jeff would agree, with unprovable assumptions, which are reasonable to assume, but they're not provable. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the constancy of the one-way velocity of light is simply an assumption or postulate of the theory. We can measure the constancy of the round-trip velocity of light. If it goes from A to B and back to A, that's always constant. We can measure that. The assumption of the theory is that it doesn't go out at one velocity and come back at another, so that the round-trip velocity is always the same, but in fact it's going one way at different rates. It can't be proved
Yeah.
scientifically. That is simply an assumption in the theory. So if you adopt this view that you could only believe what can be scientifically proven, boom, out the window goes special relativity, along with lots of other science.
Well, and I would add on, I mean, I very much, I agree with your statements, and I would say that, the ability to distinguish between science and not science, people have tried to say, okay, this is what science is, and we're going to categorize these kinds of scientists. The reality of it is I understand how I do science when I go into the lab and when I'm working on things, is there is a process I use. And as I adopt that process in my particular discipline, I am generally assured of getting good results. And then I have to go back and test and let other people do the same thing. I find that general principle of, you take that and apply that to Scripture. We have to interpret what the words of the text mean. And there's a process by which people have developed what these words mean. And then they go test it on other Scripture. It's so, if I try and break down what is science, it's very difficult. And it's a process by trying to investigate what is true. And so I use that in other areas rather than just what I'm doing in the lab.
At the foundation of modern science is a value system. You need to test theories fairly and report results honestly.
Yeah.
And interesting, that's clearly not a scientific idea. I mean, people didn't discover that by looking through a microscope or doing a dig or something. But it makes a lot of sense.